Hey friends, Shay here. So today we are here to talk about the fact that the Amazing Readathon is back. So I've got my new sweater in the new merch. If you're unfamiliar with the Amazing Readathon is an amazing readathon created by the lovely Bree over at Four Paws and a Book, all kind of based around the Amazing Race. So essentially, we're going to travel to 10 destinations in the month of June, and to get to each destination, there will be a specific prompt to fill. You will not know these ahead of time, so this can be kind of a chaotic. So there are 5 teams: Team Romance, Team Fantasy, Team Sci-Fi, Team Fiction, Historical Fiction, Lit Fiction, and Team Spooky, which is Mystery, Thrillers, and Horror. So I will not be hosting a team this year, unlike last year. Last year, I hosted the red team. Teams have changed, obviously. This year, I'm going to be what they call a producer, so I will be participating with all of the teams at various points throughout the readathon. So go ahead and choose whichever team is the genre in which you read the most. And there are amazing hosts for all of them. I am going to now direct you to Bree's video that'll explain everything in depth about this readathon, because it is fairly complicated and you're definitely going to want to join the Discord, which I will leave linked down below. There's an FAQ in there. There's lots of chatter. There's theory crafting already going on for those who were there last year. So I am very, very excited for this particular readathon. So I figured one of the best ways I could help with this readathon is to create a manga recommendation list for each category. So each team is getting some recommendations in this video. Some of them I don't have quite as many because I'm not as well read there, but there are some other amazing manga creators linked down below that may have more recommendations for you. So definitely go and check them all out because they're all amazing. So first things first, let's start with fantasy manga. So fantasy manga is something I read quite a bit. So some of these could also work for romance because they're pretty evenly spread between fantasy and romance. So you could read most of these for either. So first things first, Yona of the Dawn. Y'all know I was going to put Yona of the Dawn in here. Yona of the Dawn is about 16-year-old Yona. You're following her on her 16th birthday, in which she sees the love of her life murder her father. When that happens, the captain of the guard, Hawk, finds her. They go on the run, and they are on the run from the people who are trying to thwart the kingdom or take over the kingdom, however you want to look at it. But anyways, this is amazing. There are 41 volumes out in this series, so you could definitely read a lot for various prompts with this one, but it is a fantastic series, and I highly recommend it. The next one I have here is a personal favorite of mine, but I know it hasn't worked for others, and that is Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts. Now, in this, we're following a young woman named Seraphi who's been raised her entire life to be the sacrifice to the King of Beasts. She's always known this, and so she goes in with her eyes open into the situation, and just because of her positive outlook, people take notice of her, and she ends up winning the favor of the king and is now going to be his bride instead of his sacrifice. And things go from there. There's a lot of political development here, so I highly recommend checking this one out if you love a good political fantasy. Next, I have Beyond the Clouds. This is more like Studio Ghibli meets Final Fantasy, in which we're following a young boy who finds this young girl with wings, and he's doing everything he can to protect her and keep her safe. And it's very sweet and very cute. This is only 5 volumes. I haven't read the last volume because I'm not ready for it to be over, but I really love this series. It does have a bit of a dark turn to it, so it's not just sweet and fun the entire time. So again, if you like a little darkness in there, I highly recommend checking this one out. The next one I have here is Dawn of the Arcana. This is definitely a political fantasy with some romance thrown in there, in which we're following 2 kingdoms having a political marriage, and the servant who kind of throws all of that off. I'm not going to say too much more than that because I think this one is really fun to just kind of dig in and go and explore on your own. But again, it is very political in its fantasy, and the world is absolutely beautiful and stunning as well. So I highly recommend it. It is based on, I want to say, feudal era Japan is what I want to say, because King's Beast, which is by the same author, I believe is feudal era China. So I think, if I'm remembering right, that's how it goes. But either way, it's really, really cool. The next one is The Otherworld's books depend on the bean counter. So this is a fantasy style series in which in the manga world we call this an isekai, where a young man is pulled into a different fantastical world. Instead of being the savior, he's pulled with the savior, and he's just kind of a 9-to-5 grind workaholic. And so just because he's the tag along, he now tries to make himself important in the castle, trying to help them sort their books, things like that. And the world can actually poison him because of the magic in the air, and so he has to be magically healed. The captain of the guard chooses to do this, and I love them so very much. Read this one and enjoy. There is a light novel form as well as a manga, so if you're not necessarily into manga, maybe try the light novel because the story is absolutely fantastic. Next here I have Queen's Quality. Queen's Quality is a more urban fantasy, but I would say fantasy in which people can go in and clean and sweep out the negative impacts on our minds, and it's absolutely fantastic. I don't want to tell you more than that because it can get incredibly spoilery, but it is also very political within its dynamic, and I highly recommend checking it out. Next, I have A Kingdom of Quartz. There is only one volume of this one out right now, but it is highly recommended by me. In A Kingdom of Quartz, we have a young woman who wants nothing more than to be an archangel, but she has black wings, and so people have sorts of feelings and judgments about her. And this is all about her adventures. The first volume had my jaw on the floor. This is absolutely fantastic. The art is stunning. I highly recommend it. Next, we have an oldie but a goodie for me, and that is The Ancient Magus Bride. In The Ancient Magus Bride, we're following Chise. Chise is a young woman of 16 who her entire life has been able to see the paranormal and see the dark side of things, like the other side of the Fey veil, you could say. And so she puts herself up for auction because she doesn't care about her life anymore. The man who buys her is a man named Elias, who is not all man, we could say. He is not human. He is Fey. And buys her because he wants to consider her as a potential bride later. So they kind of form their own little, like, family, friendship, teacher-student dynamic. Not everybody's into the dynamic here, but the Fey world is done in a beautiful and fantastic way. The way it brings in alchemy from the humans is also very interesting, so I highly recommend checking out the series. There are currently 19 volumes out. The next one here is my favorite magical girl manga, and that is Magic Knight Rayearth. This is currently re-releasing, and this is about 3 girls who are also isekai'd into this fantastical world, and about how they each go in to save the world. And it's fantastic. I highly recommend it. I have a whole video about my feelings on this particular one, so I will leave that linked in the corner for you. Next, I have Princess Knight. This is a fantastic one by the classic mangaka Osamu Tezuka, in which we have a baby born with a boy's soul and a girl's soul. And so you see our Princess Knight grapple with both sides of themselves and trying to figure out what makes them happy. That's the easiest way for me to describe this without spoiling it. And I highly recommend checking it out because I think it's done brilliantly. It's in this beautiful, all-contained omnibus now. And again, I highly recommend checking this one out. And then last but not least for the fantasy manga is the quintessential and lovely Fruits Basket. Yes, I'm putting this in fantasy because when this family, the Soma family, is embraced, they turn into their zodiac animal. And there is all sorts of things going on here. It is a beautiful story. I consider all of the characters queer, except maybe Toru, but all of the Somas are queer in some way or another, and I love them. And it is so fun. I highly recommend checking out the series. It does have heavy topics thrown out there, so do check your triggers before you dive in, but it is absolutely fantastic, and I would highly recommend it. Now let's go on to the other one that's easy for me to fill in, and that is romance manga. Y'all know I'm a romance manga fiend, and I love it. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So first up, we have Fly Me to the Moon. This basically has like the tale of Princess Kaguya woven into the story here, in which we have a young woman who saves this young boy. He proposes marriage to her, and she says, "I'll come back when you turn 18, and if you still want me, we'll get married then." And it's amazing. It's sweet. It's adorable. I absolutely love it. Next, we have Demon Love Spell. This is a 6-volume shoujo series in which We have this succubus or incubus, I forget whatever the male equivalent is there, at school, and we have a shrine priestess essentially who knows this, and so she kind of keeps him in line, and it ends up being their romance. I absolutely love it. His little chibi form is adorable, and I love it so very much, and I highly recommend checking this one out. It's a lot of fun. Next, we have My Senpai is Annoying. This is a workplace romance in which we're following a very big, large man named Tanaka and a little tiny woman who they have feelings for each other, but they're both being very obtuse, and it's just rom-com shenanigans. You follow 3 different couples over the course. It's really fun. I have a good time with it and would highly recommend it. Next, we have I Married My Female Friend. This is a sapphic romance in which 2 friends get married. One is writing like a series of articles about their relationship, and the other is just so gone for her that she's willing to kind of put up with anything. And so this takes a very interesting look at the dynamics of their relationship, and I'm really excited to continue. There are currently 2 volumes out. I still need to read volume 2, but this is definitely a series I would recommend. Next, we have Yakuza Fiancé. Now, this is a messy romance, but in the best way. It'll grip you in very quickly because we have basically 2 kids who have an arranged Yakuza-style marriage, and so she needs to go get to know him better, so she moves to Tokyo to spend time with him. He's on really good behavior for the first couple of weeks, and then he's like, yeah, I'm over this. You can leave. And then, you know, she's like, I need to make myself worthwhile to him. So she went and like sold her kidney. He's like, oh, she must have left. But then she comes back, basically puts her kidney on the table and says, there you go. Now I'm worth something to you. And he's a sadist, so he's all in. And things go from there. It is very Yakuza politics, and I love it. I love it so much. I still need to read volume 7, but I've heard it's got a nasty cliffhanger, so I've been hanging on to it. So maybe I'll read it during the readathon. We'll see. Next, I have Love Me, Love Me Not. This is a 12-volume shoujo series in which we're following 2 different couples, and 2 of the people are also step-siblings. It's a very interesting dynamic. I recommend reading through to volume 3 at the very least, because the initial dynamic might make you a little weary, but definitely read the first couple. Things are nipped in the bud pretty easily, and quickly in the beginning. So I highly recommend checking this one out. Next, we have the sweet 5-volume series that is The Girl with the Senpaku Eyes. Basically, we have a girl with RBF and the cute boy that she has a crush on. They both have crushes on each other. They end up in a relationship. It's adorable. I love it so much. And it just makes my heart happy. So definitely check this one out. Next, I have Catch These Hands, which is an adult sapphic romance in which we have 2 people who knew each other as delinquents in high school, getting reacquainted as adults, and one finding out that the other had feelings for her this entire time. So they try dating and things go from there. That's all I'm going to say. Again, it's only 4 volumes. So again, check this one out. It's absolutely fun. Next, we have Manly Appetites. This is a 3-volume male-male series in which we have 2 men who are very into each other. One doesn't know initially because he is a chubby guy. He's very like self-deprecating to himself, but the hunk of the office loves to feed him, loves him just the way he is. It's absolutely adorable. I love them, and I love how things work out for them. I definitely could have taken more volumes in the series because I would have just loved to spend more time with them, but it ends in a beautiful place, and I still really enjoyed it. Next, we have Boy Meets Maria. Now, I was hesitant to initially put this on this list, but I really felt like I should. We have someone who's trying to figure out who they are, essentially, and the boy that falls in love with them. And it's really sweet and really cute. I really like it. Again, check your triggers before you enter this one because it does have some dark themes, but I don't have time to talk about them here. So I do have a dedicated video to this one as well. I'll try to leave it linked down below or in the cards for you. And then last but not least for the romance manga, we have I Hear the Sunspot. This is a very sweet male-male romance in which we're following 2 college students. One is hard of hearing. He is not completely deaf at this point, but he does hire someone to take notes in his classes, and the boy that does that for him, they end up having a romance together. It is sweet, it is precious, but it does deal with some of the major topics that you would deal with when someone is deaf or mostly deaf. And so I highly recommend checking that one out. Next, let's go to my more literary fiction, historical fiction recommendations. So first up here, we have The Rose of Versailles. This is a older style series in which we're following basically the French Revolution through the eyes of Lady Oscar, which we all thirst after Lady Oscar, and Lady Oscar thirsts after all as well. So I highly recommend it. It is absolutely fantastic. It is perfectly, absolutely messy, and it is just done brilliantly. So if you have not tried this, I highly recommend you do. This one's more literary fiction than historical, but this is Boys Run the Riot. This is a trans teen story about someone who identifies as male, but they are born in a female body, and about how they hate going to school because they have to wear the female uniform. But they love fashion. They love male fashion. They love to shop. And they end up bonding with someone in their class who's also an outsider, who they decide to make a fashion brand together. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's done in such a brilliant way. It's 4 volumes. I highly recommend it. Next, we have A Bride's Story. This is a historical fiction manga in which we're following a 20-year-old woman who's married to a 12-year-old young man. In this time and age, this was an appropriate thing to do. Nothing sexual is happening between them at this point because he is so young. He needs to kind of like prove himself as a man, but she still cares deeply for him. It might not be romantic love at this point, but she does care for him and love for him in her own way. And we follow a bunch of various couples throughout the course of the series. I really love it. This is a beautiful historical piece, and if you have not tried it and you're into historical mangas, I highly recommend you do. Don't let that trope of an older woman, younger man thing bother you, because that's not really what's going on here. And next we have Usutoki Rhetoric. This is a mystery detective noir, almost kind of feeling story based in the 1920s in Japan, just as things are starting to change there. It is done so great. We have a young woman who can hear lies, and the detective who befriends her, and they start to work together, and it's really kind of sweet and fun, and I really enjoy each volume. I'm pretty behind on this one. My stores haven't been getting it in around me, so I'm hoping to catch up very soon. Next, we have My Happy Marriage. This one is a historical piece. I felt like it could work here or in romance pretty easily, but essentially we're following a young woman named Mio. Mio is... this is basically a Cinderella story for Mio. She's been criticized her entire life, and her family decides to ship her off to a man who is known for turning away women who are potential fiancés. But Mio's, of course, the one that breaks through, and things go from there. I do think this has a lot to do with historical in this world, so I would call it a historical, personally. But this could work for either fantasy or romance as well, because there are fantastical elements to it, because there's magic. Next, we have The Heiress and the Chauffeur. Again, kind of based in 1920s Japan, but again, much more contemporary. This one's only 2 volumes, so I definitely don't want to say much about it other than it's a romance between a woman and her chauffeur. So that's all I'm going to say. It's really cute. I really like it, but I love the historical pieces most. That's what kept me going through the series. Next, we have The Apothecary Diaries. The Apothecary Diaries is one of my all-time favorite series, featuring a woman named Mao Mao. Mao Mao is essentially kidnapped and sold off to the palace. And so she tries to lay low because she doesn't want them to get paid quickly because she's smart and intelligent. But people figure out what's going on with her, and she ends up being this consultant, essentially, for the man who runs the inner court of the palace, and works with all of the concubines and the empress apparents. And it's fantastic. I'm describing it very badly, but it is absolutely brilliant. Anyone who's read much manga knows about Apothecary Diaries if they haven't read it yet. So this is one that I definitely recommend diving into if you're into historical stories. Next here, I have Heaven Official's Blessing. This is the boys love Chinese light novel of my dreams, essentially. This is an 8-volume series in which we're following two cultivation beings, and it's brilliant. I don't want to say much more. I think this is worth, it does just kind of drop you in. So if you don't know much about cultivation, you might feel a little lost, but I recommend kind of toughing through it. You'll get it. They'll explain everything you need to know, but it's absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend. And then last but not least for this category, we are going to talk about Red River. Red River. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is based in Egypt, actually. It's more of an Egyptian culture. And again, we're dealing with a girl who's isekai'd into this, but we end up staying in that historical time period. And she is brought there to fall in love with the prince. The prince is trying to deny it, but is gaga for her. And I love it. I love it so much. We're getting reprints this year. I'm so excited. But yes, you can read it on the Viz Manga app in the meantime. Let's move over to spooky mangas. So these are going to have mystery, thriller, or horror elements to them. I am a baby when it comes to these things, so do know that going in. You might think some of these are kind of a stretch if you read a lot of mystery, thriller, horror, but these are ones that I can recommend soundly. But I know that a lot of people love Junji Ito for horror. I am a baby, and just looking at his covers can trigger me sometimes. So if you're looking for horror, definitely start there with manga and then branch out. So here are the ones that I have for you. So the first one here is Phantom Tales of the Night. This is one based in the yokai culture of Japan. There's a lot of kind of thrillery, horror-y almost elements to this one. It's right on the cusp of what I can handle. So I highly recommend checking this one out because I do think the art is brilliant and does a fantastic job of squigging you out. Next I have Can't Stop Cursing You. This is basically a short condensed version of what Death Note should have been. People make pacts with demons. One made a pact to take out other people who made pacts with demons. So it's very interesting. I highly recommend checking this one out. I need to finish it. I'll probably read some of it during this readathon. But yes, definitely one worth checking out. It's only 4 volumes. So if you wanted something that you could read all of for a prompt, that's pretty quick. I think you could do that for this one. Next, we have A School Frozen in Time. This is definitely a mystery on the thriller side, in which 8 kids show up to school and they all slowly start disappearing. That's all I'm going to say. Again, 4 volumes, very short, but I think it's very well done. Then we've got Toilet Bound Hanako-kun. This one, again, is kind of a stretch. There's definitely mysteries going on here. We have the 7 mysteries of the school, and they are basically yokai characters or, people who are haunting this school, and it's very interesting and very good. This was a host pick last year, and that's how I started reading it. I am now current on it, so I won't be reading any during June, but I absolutely love the series and would highly recommend checking it out. Next year we have Chojin X. This is by the same creator as Tokyo Ghoul, which would also work for this prompt or for this category of manga. In Chojin X, we basically have people who become part demon, you could say, or, they call them Chojins. And then we have these 2 characters who end up going to Chojin school because they become Chojins. And you kind of follow them from there. It's really interesting and really cool. The next one I have here is The Summer Hikaru Died. This is definitely on the thriller horror side of things, in which we have this boy who's been in love with his best friend for a very long time. And his best friend comes back down from the mountains one summer and he's different. And this friend that's been in love with him notices, obviously. And so from there, he discovers that his friend is dead and this yokai has taken over his body. And it is the weird, twisted, macabre thing that happens between them now. And it's done in a very brilliant way. Like, I highly recommend checking it out. But again, it's right on that cusp of thriller horror for me that I can barely handle. But if you're into this, I highly recommend checking this one out if you haven't. There are currently 3 volumes out in English. Another obvious one here, obviously, is Death Note. If I'm going to recommend Can't Stop Cursing You, of course, I'm going to recommend Death Note. Death Note is one of the most well-known mangas out there, in which we're following a young man named Light Yagami, who ends up finding the notebook called the Death Note. There's a Shikigami, or a Japanese death god, attached to this, and Light Yagami uses this notebook to... It starts off by killing known criminals in prison, and he becomes this vigilante from there. It's a very interesting moral gray ground kind of story. It is very dense, so I recommend reading through it with some time, obviously. But if you're going to dedicate a lot of time to the readathon, you could definitely sit down and do that during this. The next one here is an obvious one, and that is Jujutsu Kaisen. It is definitely on that thriller side of an action story in which we're following a young man who eats a demon's finger and becomes part demon, and it goes from there. They're big bads. I've only read the first 4 volumes, so I don't know nearly as much as most. But again, this is a fantastic series, and I would highly recommend it. The last one I'm going to recommend for this grouping is going to be called Frau Faust. This is by the same creator as The Ancient Magus Bride, but this is a Faust retelling of sorts, in which this demon has basically cut up its entire body and spread it all over the world, and Frau Faust needs to go, or Johanna Faust, has to go and find it and put it all back together. It's very interesting, very macabre. I actually really enjoyed this one, and I would highly recommend checking it out. All right, let's go on to the few sci-fis that I have. Sci-fi manga is not something I've read a ton of, but these are the ones that I've read that I really enjoyed. So first up, we have Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This is definitely more of a nature kind of sci-fi, in which we're following a young woman who wants to protect her valley from, you know, big bad corporations trying to just take over and build on it. It's absolutely fantastic. There are amazing creatures. This is a Hayao Miyazaki original, and yes. If you've not read or watched Nausicaa, I highly recommend you do. Next, we have Neon Genesis Evangelion, and this is what they call a mecha series, in which people enter robots to protect the world. And we have a young man who's recruited to come and do this for the company that currently employs his father, even though he's not had a relationship with his father for many years. And things go from there. It's very interesting. It's very heartwarming, and there's a lot going on here, so I do recommend it. Next, we have Assassination Classroom, in which an alien comes down, basically wreaking havoc, and he is now a teacher for this classroom. If the kids in this class can assassinate him by a certain date, he will not blow up the world. And that's the essential premise of the story. It's done in a really interesting way, and I really enjoyed it. And it was very, there are 21 volumes of this one, and I did end up crying by the end. So it's fun. It's fun, but heartwarming at the same time. It's a really good one. Next, we have number 6, which is kind of a dystopic sci-fi, in which this is one that I'm pretty new to, and it's been a minute since I've read the first volume. I need to reread it and then read the other 2. But I've kind of banked them for this readathon, so I'm not remembering too much, and I don't have the back to read to you. But yes, I would definitely recommend picking up number 6 because I remember enjoying it very much. Then we have Astra Lost in Space, which is essentially very classic sci-fi, almost Star Trek kind of feeling, in which this class of kids is supposed to go on this field trip to another planet and be by themselves, but they end up sent somewhere completely different, and it's their journey home. So it's very Star Trek Voyager feeling, and I loved it for that. So next I have Shangri-La Frontier. Shangri-La Frontier is a video game inspired story in which we're dealing with technology where you can deep dive and fully be immersed in it. Kind of like VR on steroids. And in this one, this kid, or this young man, has purposely played really bad video games. And so the biggest game in the world, Shangri-La Frontier, recruits him to come in and play this game. And he's like, in like 2 days of being in the game, he gets further than anyone's gotten in months. And he kind of becomes the it guy in the game. It's really cool. I really like it. It's a different take on a sci-fi, and I really enjoyed it. So I would recommend checking this one out if you haven't. It's kind of an underrated favorite out there. And then last but not least for this recommendation list is going to be Chobits. Now this isn't going to be for everybody. I have a whole reading vlog where I talk about Chobits, so I will leave that linked in the corner for more details for you. But essentially we're following a man who ends up finding a robot, and things go from there. So with that said, thank you all so much for checking out this video. If you're participating in the Amazing Readathon, leave an emoji of the team that you're on already. If not, if you're here just because you love me, leave an airplane emoji, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.